Hello, my name is Brett, and I'm 15 years old. I want to tell you what a weird thing growing up is. You probably already know this. When you grow up, you start to look at things differently, and it's usually cool. It's like you're getting smarter, you understand more, but sometimes it can be painful because it concerns the ones you love. Especially when you have to make a choice, and no matter what choice you make, you will always betray somebody. As you might have already guessed, I'm talking about my parents and their divorce. 5 years ago, my mother left, leaving me with my father. I was barely 10 years old at the time. I cried bitterly and begged her to take me with her, and she also cried, but kept repeating that it was a path she had to take. My father was silent, holding my hand tightly, and I thought that I would never hate anybody as much as I hated him. After all, my mother was leaving because of him. He never understood her. He only scolded her and tore her wings apart. This was not something I made up. She had repeatedly told me this herself, and now she was leaving to finally find her true self. I thought about her leaving in search of her true self as her quest, her dangerous journey, but I still begged her to take me with her. Instead, she left, and I was left behind. I missed her terribly. We always had such a good time and did so many interesting things. Well, my father worked from morning to night, which we never talked about because, according to my mother, it was incredibly boring. She always came up with something unusual. We'd play hide and seek in the underground parking lot of a supermarket, or we'd go to an unknown neighborhood of the city and sing sad songs there, putting a small carton box next to us with a handwritten sign on its side saying, "For food." And after that, we laughed like crazy counting the coins. She had thousands of ideas. Everything was always fun with my mother, until my father found out about whatever we had done. He became terribly gloomy, and when I went to bed, I heard my parents arguing. I remembered all this, now that my mother had gone to find herself, but in fact, it was I who lost her, and my life lost all its color. Many times, I remembered how my mother woke me up late at night and whispered in my ear, asking me what I would say if right now we ran away to the coast. "The wind smells like the sea tonight, Bretty, and I think this is a great idea," she whispered, smiling. We lived almost 1,000 miles away from the coast. It was late autumn, but I was 7 years old, and I was extremely excited. While I put my clothes on, my mother told me all the details of her plan. We would hitchhike all the way. She said that it would be wonderful and nothing could be better because we could chat with different people and see so much. We packed my backpack quietly so that your dad doesn't wake up. Let him guess tomorrow where we've gone. And we were ready to slip out of the house. But my father still woke up, and when I joyfully told him about our escape plan and even dared to suggest that we could run away to the coast altogether, he became absolutely infuriated. He called my mother an idiot without brains and said he was also an idiot to have a baby with her. Before that, he had never shouted at her, at least not in my presence. I was terribly scared, and I ran away and hid under my bed. And now I lived with this man. Mom had repeatedly told me that he was a boring person without any creative imagination, and indeed, life with him was incredibly boring, and also, I was afraid of him. In general, we talked very little, and often ate our evening meals in silence when he returned from work. Once, I was so tired of being silent that I asked, just to say something, "How was your day, Dad?" He looked at me in surprise, and after a couple of seconds quietly asked, "Do you really want to know?" I could not understand the expression on his face. His voice seemed threatening to me, and I answered, "No, not really," and lowered my eyes back to the plate. 1 year passed, and my mother started to send me postcards. It happened rarely, once every few months, and there was no hi, no greetings from, not a word, just an empty postcard with an address. But I was still happy. My father turned them over to me in silence, and I ran upstairs to examine them closely in my room. The return addresses were strange and mysterious. They challenged my imagination and made me search for unfamiliar words on the internet. Mom sent them from a Tibetan monastery, from a retreat center in Bali, from an ashram in Goa. Several times I wrote back to these addresses, trying to explain to my mother how I missed her and how much I suffered without her. In my letters, I begged her to take me away from this terrible person who didn't think about anything other than his work. But all my pleas went unanswered, and then the cards stopped coming. As I was growing up, my hatred toward my father grew with me. I became a teenager and stopped being afraid of him. Instead, I began to argue with him and directly blame him for driving my mother to despair with his constant nitpicking, for strangling her with his mediocrity, and hence forcing her to leave. My father never answered any of these accusations, so I tried to run away from home. The first time I ran away, I got scared and returned home before my father came home from work. But the next time, I got to the highway where a truck driver found me. I explained to him that I was going to Amma Ashram in Kerala to look for my mother. The driver asked where this place was located, and when I answered that it was in India, he said, "Oh, I see." I thought he was going to help me get to India, but he drove me to the nearest police station on the highway and, well, tightly holding my hand, gave me to the cops. I was so embarrassed that I did not look at anybody, and I was also terribly angry and very afraid. When my father came for me, I thought he would yell at me the same way he had shouted at my mother, and I was ready to fight him back, but he only silently took me into the car and drove me home. "Did you want to go to her?" he asked me quietly, somewhere in the middle of our drive, not taking his eyes off the road. I said nothing, not knowing what to tell him, and then he added, "I also miss her very much. I miss my colorful little bird. But I think that she lives better out there without us." I could not stand it and burst into tears, and, all my hatred toward my father came out with these tears, forever. Time passed. I was already 13. The movie Doctor Strange appeared on the big screen, and the events in the film somehow mixed in my head with everything. How I imagined my mother's life, as her days were passing somewhere, surrounded by all these monks and gurus. No, I was already grown up enough to not wonder whether she had become a sorceress. It was just that everything connected to her started to seem distant and unreal to me. Apparently, I began to get used to this ordinary, boring life my mother hated so much. I was very into math. I began to make progress in baseball, and I learned to play the guitar. I realized that I did not know what profession I wanted to choose, and I talked a lot with my dad about this. He told me that when he was about my age, he also could not decide who he wanted to be, a rock star or an accountant. As a result, he became an electrical engineer. Once, I asked him to take me to work with him, and I was absolutely shocked. I never imagined that my father was working at such heights. His boring work turned out to be something that was literally breathtaking. Another year passed, and my father and I got into trouble. There was an accident at work, which didn't exactly happen with my father, but with his partner. But my father tried to help. He violated safety precautions and was badly injured. Doctors tried, but couldn't save his leg. So in one day, my father lost his leg and his job. In addition, the insurance company decided the matter not in his favor, as certain safety precautions were violated, and he received just a small compensation. Now we had to worry about how we would survive. Of course, Dad tried to cheer himself up, but it was not easy. I did my best to support him and spent as much time as I could with him. Once, when my father and I were at home playing guitars together, the doorbell rang. At first, I couldn't understand who this beautiful, well-groomed, and self-confident woman standing on the threshold of our house was. But it was my mom. A man in a suit was standing behind her. We would later learn that this was her lawyer. This was how my mother returned home after 5 years of being in search of spiritual growth. She had not only become a successful coach in overcoming burnout syndrome, she also got quite familiar with legal issues, especially the ones that had to do with divorce, property, and me. Among other arguments, her lawyer presented my father with a packet of my childhood letters in which I complained about an unbearable life and begged her to take me away. The very letters to which I never received an answer to. It was very painful to realize that my mother, in fact, had not changed at all. The mischievous fairy of my childhood has always been just a selfish madcap, but now she wanted much more mundane things than before. Needless to say, I did not have the slightest desire to take her side. The divorce procedure wasn't easy at all. My mother spared no money on lawyers, and my father thought about giving up more than once. But I wasn't ready to give up. At the beginning of this story, I told you how painful it was to make a choice when, in any case, you turned out to be a traitor. However, it did not mean that there was no choice. So, it happened that when I was a kid, I was unfair and even cruel to my father because of my mother's influence, and now, according to her, I broke her heart because I have chosen to stay with my father. But you know what? I think my mom will be able to find solace by visiting some ashram. Have you ever had to look at familiar people from a new angle after a long separation? Write about it in the comments and watch other videos on this channel.
Hey, I'm Camille, and this story is about my crazy mother. She had a new boyfriend every week, and one time she even dated her own cousin. It was so gross, but everything changed when she met Michael. He was a decent guy with a stable job, no drug problems, and no former arrests by the police. So when they got married, I was truly happy for them. But of course, my mom had to ruin everything, because one day, my boyfriend and I came home late. We were completely wasted, and while I went to bed, he fell asleep on the couch. The next morning, he sent me a really disturbed message saying that my mom had made out with him last night while it was dark. He said he didn't notice it was my mom until it was too late and you know what. Well, this wasn't the first time she had tried to destroy my life. Back when I was 14, I asked her to stop wearing miniskirts because it was embarrassing. But the next day, she stormed into my school class wearing the shortest miniskirt I'd ever seen and screamed, "My daughter Camille thinks I'm an embarrassment. She doesn't want her mother to dress like a b***." Afterwards, I was made fun of for years. But this time, she had slept with my boyfriend and taken things too far. I knew I had to take my revenge. So the next morning, I came very close to her husband Michael and said, "Stepdaddy, can you make me some breakfast?" I even fluttered my eyes at him, but he just ignored it. In the end, I showed him my boyfriend's SMS and told him that his wife had slept with my boyfriend. And for the first time, I saw him getting angry. I mean, no wonder. He had treated my mom with so much respect, and in return, she had cheated on him with a 20-year-old boy. I knew he deserved someone better, and that person was me. I'm not allowed to talk about the details here on YouTube, but let's just say that for the next few months, me and my stepdad Michael had a very close relationship. And somehow, I got pregnant. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep the baby. But then I realized that having a kid with my mom's husband was the ultimate revenge on her. And Michael was a good catch anyway, so I had nothing to lose. But when I told her I was pregnant without knowing who the father was, she started laughing and said she had always known I would end up as a single mother. I got so mad. I was about to tell her the truth, but I knew it wasn't the right moment. And for the next few months, Michael took great care of me, even though my mom didn't like it. She said, "Michael, stop cooking her meals. She has to learn to be a single mom because that's what she is." It went on like this until I was giving birth. My mom was right next to me, making one sarcastic comment after the other, like, "Oh, this baby will be a problem child. It's already causing lots of trouble." At some point, I had enough and couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, "Michael got me pregnant! Your stupid husband got me pregnant! It's his child, you stupid." I'll never forget the look on her face. At first, she was just quiet. She wasn't sure if I was making a joke or not, but when she realized I wasn't joking, she went berserk, and it took 3 doctors to keep her away from me. Meanwhile, I was laughing so hard I almost fell out of bed. I knew I had finally gotten my revenge. And after I had given birth, Michael came inside to take a look at his daughter. I immediately knew he would be a great father. But then I noticed that he had a big bruise on his face. I asked what happened, and he said my mom had attacked him in the hospital lobby, screaming, "You got my daughter pregnant! You pig! I'll divorce you, you dirty piece of shit!" And afterwards, the police had to arrest her. We both started laughing, even though we knew this wasn't over yet. The next day, my stepdad went to work, but when he stepped out of his car, my mom drove her car right into him. Luckily, she missed him, and now she's serving a 5-year prison sentence for attempted murder. Of course, I feel bad for her. That's also why I decided to visit her in prison to apologize. But when she saw me, she went nuclear again, hitting against the window and screaming like a psycho. It was so scary, but I couldn't resist laughing again. Please understand that she had always been a terrible mom. When I was 9 and having summer vacation, she disappeared for 2 weeks. I was petrified and not sure if she was still alive, so I just hid inside my wardrobe all day and night. When she finally came back, I ran up to her to take her into my arms, but she just pushed me away and told me to go to sleep. To be fair though, there were some funny moments. One time, she broke into our neighbor's garage and stole his lawnmower. And 1 week later, she did a garage sale and sold the same lawnmower she had stolen back to its previous owner for $100. Another time, I told her that my teacher was picking on me, and the next day, she stormed into my school and physically attacked that teacher. That's probably not the best way to show your love, but it still counts.